He believed he could control the story to his advantage. But Karoline Leavitt skillfully flipped the script using his own words. Right in front of the audience. The lights shone brightly, the cameras were rolling, and the energy in the studio was palpable. Sharp enough to cut through steel. A crowded venue. Countless viewers tuning in from their devices. And two individuals positioned opposite one another, each anticipating the other's initial action. Karoline Leavitt sat confidently, her expression enigmatic, as the prominent liberal reporter David Langford straightened his tie and cleared his throat. He leaned in slightly, his voice projecting a certain confidence that suggested he had a specific purpose in mind. Karoline, let's get real. The citizens of this great nation are entitled to the truth. Donald Trump has persistently provided misleading information to this nation. Just last week, he asserted that during his presidency, the economy was more robust than it had ever been. However, we must acknowledge the reality. During the Biden administration, we have seen a decrease in unemployment rates alongside an increase in wages. Isn't it time we acknowledge the reality of Trump's policies and their consequences? Karoline's face lit up with a hint of amusement. The expression conveyed a sense of anticipation. As if to say, I was expecting this moment. She inhaled deeply, allowing the silence to linger for a moment, creating an atmosphere charged with anticipation. Then she spoke, her tone steady yet assertive. David, I value your effort, but let's keep the facts straight. You're addressing the nation, asserting that conditions have improved under Biden's leadership. Let's focus on the facts rather than emotions. She angled her body just enough for the camera, fully aware of how this moment would unfold on social media in the future. During Trump's presidency, the average gas price stood at $2.07 per gallon. Under the current administration, many Americans are facing challenges with prices exceeding $4 in several states. During Trump's presidency, inflation was recorded at less than 2%. Under Biden, it surged to over 9% at its highest point. And let's not overlook, David interjected swiftly, his tone becoming noticeably more pointed. That seems a bit misleading. Karoline, inflation is a global issue. And it's important to acknowledge the role Trump played in the economic downturn that occurred when Biden took office. Karoline remained composed. She confidently reached for her notes and lifted a sheet of paper with purpose. This information comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In December 2020, just prior to Biden assuming office, the inflation rate stands at 1.4%. That's not a recipe for failure, that's a solid economic foundation. Next, we will examine January 2022. Under Biden's leadership, the figure stands at 7.5%. Do you really want to convey to the American people that the issues stemmed from Trump's policies? David let out a breath through his nose, adjusting his position in the chair. Karoline was keenly aware of the subtle signs that others might have overlooked. He was adjusting his approach, seeking a fresh perspective. Before he had the chance to respond, she took the initiative to continue the discussion, specifically focusing on the topic of unemployment. As it was already mentioned, the Biden administration often takes pride in the low unemployment rate, yet they tend to overlook the surrounding context. Before the pandemic, during Trump's administration, we achieved the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, standing at 3.5%. That was an impressive achievement. When COVID struck, naturally, unemployment surged. What we experienced was a worldwide crisis, rather than a failure of policy. Even at that time, Trump spearheaded the quickest economic recovery seen in modern history. Biden took over an economy that was already on the path to recovery. He failed to address any issues. He simply claimed the credit for the rebound that was already in progress. David chuckled softly, shaking his head in amusement. Karoline, you're reshaping the story. It's important to highlight that Trump is currently dealing with several legal challenges. Should the American people place their trust in someone with such a cloud of controversy hanging over him? Karoline tilted her head, embodying a sense of anticipation as if this moment had been perfectly timed for her arrival. David, I would like to ask you something. You've labeled Trump as untrustworthy. But what is your explanation for this perspective? With a swift motion, she reached under the table and retrieved a small remote. A video clip started playing on the studio screen behind them with just a single click. The color faded from David's face. Yet this was merely the start. David Langford's expression tightened as the clip played in the background. The audio was clear and distinct. It was his own voice, captured during an interview just a few months prior. When we examine the facts, it is clear that Trump's economic policies resulted in significant job growth and higher wages. His style might not be to your taste, yet the numbers speak for themselves. The irony struck with overwhelming force. The reporter who had recently characterized Trump's presidency as an economic failure now faced his own statements. Clear evidence that he had previously acknowledged the contrary. Karoline allowed the silence to linger, ensuring the moment carried the significance it warranted. There was no need for her to speak at this moment. The audience, whether present in the studio or watching from home, was actively engaging and completing the narrative. David blinked, his mouth parting just a bit before he managed to let out a chuckle. Karoline, let's clarify that point. That occurred in a different era. She leaned in with intent. Distinct era. David, that statement was made just 8 months ago. If the facts shift so rapidly for you, perhaps the audience ought to consider what other details you conveniently overlook when it aligns with your story. David's hands rested gently on the desk. He was an experienced figure in the media landscape, adept at steering the conversation. However, this was unique. Karoline was acutely aware that the dynamics had changed. The real issue, she continued, her tone steady, isn't that you made a mistake earlier. It's as if you appear on television today and act as though those words were never spoken. That's the challenge with a lot of mainstream media. You alter the narrative as it unfolds and anticipate that others will remain oblivious. However, they certainly do. David, they observe. David shook his head, managing a strained smile. Let's address the topic of honesty by examining Trump's behavior. He stirred up turmoil, rejected the election outcomes, and is currently confronting several indictments. Should we really overlook all of that? Karoline took a deep breath, tilting her head slightly. It's important to clarify a point. Trump raised doubts about the outcome of the 2020 election. Hillary Clinton also experienced this in 2016. Stacey Abrams also made significant strides in Georgia. What sets them apart? When Democrats raise concerns about election outcomes, it is seen as a safeguard for democracy. When Republicans engage in such actions, it poses a significant risk to our democratic principles. The studio audience buzzed with quiet conversation. David made another adjustment. Regarding the indictments, she continued, we've experienced this scenario previously. Political lawfare has a long history. However, let's consider for a moment that Trump is as culpable as you wish others to think. Are you prepared to evaluate Biden with the same criteria? It seems there are numerous alleged corruption scandals related to his family that you tend to overlook. David expressed his disdain. Let's delve into the intriguing world of conspiracy theories. Karoline arched an eyebrow. Oh, so now we're adopting the approach where anything that reflects poorly on my side is labeled a conspiracy theory. That's adorable. However, let's be honest, David, this is not a matter of truth. It's all about having control. The media plays a crucial role in determining which stories gain attention and which ones fade into the background. You're not sharing knowledge, you're guiding individuals. David began to formulate his response, but he quickly realized he had to wait. As Karoline was still speaking, David Langford was struggling, and it was evident to all around him. The assurance he entered with had been eroded gradually until only exasperation lingered. He was acutely aware of the cameras focused on him, conscious that each expression, every anxious glance, and every awkward breath would soon be analyzed online in no time. However, Karoline remained resolute. She leaned in slightly, her voice steady and assured. How about we start with something straightforward? David? Absolutely. It's a straightforward answer. Can you confirm whether you stated that Trump's economic policies resulted in historic job growth? David exhaled sharply. I have already provided an explanation. Absolutely. It's a straightforward answer. Karoline fixed her gaze firmly on his. David paused for a moment, then let out a breath through his nose. Absolutely, and I appreciate it. She acknowledged with a nod. So, if that was indeed the case 8 months ago, what has specifically changed since then? Did the facts unexpectedly change? Or was it simply a matter of convenience for you? David's expression became stern. He realized he was being cornered, and it filled him with frustration. It seems like you're reducing the complexity of the situation. Karoline, Understanding the surrounding circumstances is crucial. Karoline tilted her head slightly, a subtle smirk dancing at the corner of her lips. Absolutely. I concur. Context is important. Let's go ahead and add a bit more. Shall we? She leaned forward, retrieved a folder, and smoothly placed a printed transcript on the table. This document outlines each instance where your position has changed based on the current administration. In 2019, it was stated that increasing wages and historically low unemployment rates demonstrated the economy's success. That occurred during the Trump administration. In 2022, during Biden's administration, it was stated that unemployment numbers do not provide the complete picture. Wages are not keeping pace with inflation. Your shift in stance, David, was not a result of economic changes, but rather due to a change in leadership. David's lips formed a tight, straight line. His fingers curled slightly as he glanced at the transcript, then returned his gaze to Karoline. He understood that he couldn't contradict something he had authored himself. You don't convey the information, she continued, her tone precise yet unwavering. It's in your hands. You guide people in shaping their thoughts. When the facts don't align with the story being presented, they are manipulated. That does not qualify as journalism. This is clearly a form of propaganda. The studio was completely quiet. The audience, previously murmuring during the debate, appeared to collectively hold its breath. David's jaw tightened. He made an effort to compose himself. Yet the harm had already been inflicted. He was revealed, not merely as an individual who had made an error in speech, but as someone who had intentionally distorted information to align with a specific narrative. And then we faced the ultimate challenge. Karoline reclined in her chair, releasing a breath as if this entire interaction had merely been a minor annoyance. Have you ever considered this, David? Despite everything that has happened, you still refuse to acknowledge your mistake. Not at all. This is truly what we are focusing on, isn't it? It's not about the truth. It's all about having control. It's essential to ensure that your audience embraces the narrative you wish to convey, regardless of how often you may need to adjust the storyline to achieve that goal. David Langford found himself with nothing remaining. No response. There is no defense. There was no turning point that could rescue him. And the entire world was observing. However, this was merely the initial stage of the consequences. David Langford remained still, his lips sealed, his typical eloquence lost amidst the chaos of the interview. The atmosphere in the studio was dense, no longer filled with tension, but rather with the unmistakable burden of being in the spotlight. He found himself without a destination. No amount of practiced transitions or polished statements could undo the events that had just unfolded. And Karoline was fully aware of it. She remained humble. There was no necessity for her to do so. The moment truly conveyed its own message. The moderator, who had been notably silent during the discussion, finally cleared his throat, eager to take charge once again. Well, that was definitely an engaging discussion. He emitted a strained laugh. Yet the others remained silent. The impact had extended well beyond the confines of the studio. Social media experienced an explosive growth in real time. David Langford's exposure quickly became a trending topic within minutes. Footage of the interaction surged across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The pivotal moment, the precise instant David understood he was trapped, was showcased repeatedly, transformed into slow-motion sequences, accompanied by harsh commentary. Observe as this individual experiences a profound moment of transcendence. This is the reason behind the growing distrust in mainstream media. Karoline Leavitt presented David Langford with his own words, observing as he struggled to process them. Even traditional media outlets, typically inclined to defend their own, found it challenging to overlook the disaster. There were attempts to twist the narrative, suggesting that Karoline had caught David off guard or that the video was misrepresented. Yet the complete interview was accessible to all. This time, no effort to manage the situation can obscure the truth. And then arrived the most challenging moment for David. His own colleagues, journalists who had previously stood by him, started to pull away. A prominent political analyst from a rival network stated, "This is the reason trust in the media has reached an all-time low. We must strive for improvement." A former producer from David's own show even shared a cryptic tweet. Some individuals prioritize stories over factual accuracy. Eventually, it was inevitable that it would catch up to them. The walls were closing in. David's silence in the aftermath spoke volumes. There is no statement for damage control. There will be no post on social media. No explanation provided during the broadcast. What could he possibly say? He was apprehended, revealed through his own statements. However, Karoline still had more to share. David Langford sat rigidly in his chair. His typical presence of command disrupted. The silence that lingered between him and Karoline was not merely awkward, it carried a weight of condemnation. He sensed it. The audience was fully engaged. And most concerning, the millions tuning in from home could sense it. Karoline remained poised, allowing the moment to unfold. She understood the right moments to advance and when to allow the gravity of the truth to resonate. Then, she presented the final element. David, I will be impartial. Perhaps this was simply an error. It's possible that there was no intention to create a contradiction. Perhaps you genuinely think you are sharing the truth with others. She gave a slight shrug. However, there is an issue at hand. When errors consistently appear to benefit a particular side, and when the truth seems to change based on who holds power, that cannot be considered journalism. That is a form of activism. David began to speak. It was uncertain whether to engage in debate or to step back. However, Karoline had more to say. While you assert your commitment to democracy, it's essential to recognize that a truly democratic society relies on an informed public. What you're doing, much like many in the media, lacks the essence of true information dissemination. It's all about shaping how others see things. You're not providing everyone with the complete picture. You provide them with the right amount of information to guide their perspectives in your desired direction. She allowed that to resonate before leaning forward, establishing a direct connection with him through her gaze. David, if you had the authority to shape the beliefs of the American people, would you ever acknowledge your mistakes? Or would you simply continue to revise the narrative until the truth faded from memory? The words lingered in the atmosphere, cutting through the silence with an undeniable intensity. David's expression flickered. He felt the urge to respond. It was essential. What could he possibly articulate? His credibility was dismantled, section by section, before the eyes of the entire nation. In today's landscape of media, how things are perceived holds immense significance. The moderator, realizing the interview had gone off the rails, quickly sought a way out. Thank you all for your attention. We'll conclude our discussion here. However, Karoline was not going to make it simple for him. One last thing, she interjected smoothly, her tone now more buoyant, as if this had all been nothing more than a standard fact-check. She faced the camera, her voice unwavering. To all of you tuning in from home, let me emphasize the importance of independent thinking. Understanding the importance of questioning narratives is crucial. When the media selectively decides which truths to present, it transcends mere bias, it becomes a form of manipulation. She leaned back, allowing the moment to fully resonate. David Langford remained seated, quiet, vulnerable, and shamed, and the entire world was paying attention. The interview concluded, yet the influence was only starting to unfold. As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, David Langford swiftly removed his earpiece, deliberately steering clear of Karoline's gaze while quietly mumbling to himself. The studio crew shared apprehensive looks, fully aware that they had just experienced a pivotal moment in their careers. Karoline, in contrast, maintained her composure. She stood confidently, adjusted her blazer, and extended her hand to the moderator, exuding grace in her triumph. However, beyond the studio, there was complete disorder. As Karoline stepped outside, her phone buzzed incessantly. Notifications came pouring in, news articles, trending tweets, response videos. The hashtag Karoline exposes media topped the trending topics list. One clip has already gathered more than 1 million views. Observe as David Langford experiences a profound moment of transformation before your eyes. Even networks that usually overlooked Karoline found it impossible to remain quiet. Some attempted to minimize it, describing the exchange as intense. Some individuals supported David, alleging that Karoline employed dishonest strategies. However, the harm had already been inflicted. The footage was ubiquitous. What stands out even more is who chose to remain silent. David Langford's network remained quiet. There is no segment that replays the interview. There was no panel discussion in support of him. What stands out as the most brutal indicator? David chose not to tweet. For a man who shaped his profession around storytelling, That silence resonated more profoundly than any words could. As the week drew to a close, murmurs started to spread through media circles. Is Langford finished? Producers are evaluating the possibility of renewing his contract. He may consider a brief hiatus to allow for some cooling down. There has been no official statement released. No efforts were made to bounce back from the embarrassment. So, the question is, how does one bounce back from an experience like that? Now, let's turn our attention to Karoline. She was making waves. She had a full schedule. Several networks have expressed interest in conducting interviews. Invitations for podcasts came flooding in. Even those who sometimes held differing opinions could not overlook her accomplishments. So, what can we take away from this experience? Individuals appeared fatigued, frustrated with the influence of media distortion, frustrated with the inconsistencies, frustrated by the constant shifting of perspectives, especially when it seems to align with convenience. Karoline had achieved more than merely winning a debate. She revealed a system. Karoline sat in her car, observing the headlines pour in, and a smile spread across her face. It wasn't merely about a personal triumph, it was about the significance it held. People were actively engaged. They were inquiring. In a landscape where stories are shaped, posing the right inquiries stands as the most potent action you can take. If you value truth over spin and prioritize facts over feelings, take action instead of remaining passive. Keep yourself updated. Maintain a critical mindset. And above all, maintain your engagement. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, subscribe, and tap that notification bell. This marks the start of an exciting journey.